We are over time, so we will try and make up some time by asking the questions very quickly, if that helps. But thank you very much, and I will introduce each panelist as we go. So I'm Richard from the Medical Research Council. I'm very much on the early stage in the funding space and the early stage for R&D for the vaccine. So think of it as the pipeline that comes through. We have a very distinguished panel this afternoon. I'm in Joburg, it's the time zone change, where we have really looking at the intersection between how policy between different government departments and collaborations can really look at how we need to address some of the gaps and the challenges that were highlighted in the previous session. So we're going to keep up with exactly the same format as the previous session, if I may, and introduce each speaker as we go through a couple of questions. Maybe I'll do that first, so I'll probably get this right, get my glasses. So we have a very good panel to go through. Dr. Mlungisi Kele, Director General from the Department of Science, Technology and Innovation. Marion Schonenfeld, who is the Senior Pharmaceutical Policy Specialist at the Department of Health. Dr. Tebogo Makube, Deputy Director General for the Department of Trade and Industry and Competition. Farah Lasper, who is the Board Chairperson of the African Vaccine Manufacturing Initiative. And Dr. Savas Nicolo, who I'm sure needs no introduction, Board Director from the Pharmaceutical Manufacturers Association of South Africa. So we've got a really, really strong panel, and I'm going to try and keep us to try and flesh out some of the questions. So, Director General, can I kick off with you, if I may, if you can grab a microphone? And maybe to pick up some of the topics that we spoke on in the previous session about the key roles of different government departments working together to see how we can get this vaccine industry rolling. But what specific policies or strategies is the DSTI developed to strengthen the local vaccine manufacturing space?
Great. Thank you. Good afternoon, colleagues. All protocol observed. So the first point to make is that we are having what we call the Science, Technology and Innovation Decadal Plan, which is setting a long-term priorities for our system, of which health innovation is one of them. It's a framework. It provides the framework within which this question that we're dealing with is located. But more specifically, and the Minister did mention, we have developed what we call the Vaccine Innovation and Manufacturing. It's a draft strategy, which is also meant to make sure that all existing capabilities, they are consolidated in a specific way. But secondly, the draft is meant to leverage partnerships with global players, including the WHO, CEPI, Gavi, Africa, CDC, and more effective, because we need to present a consolidated national plan. So that's one. But two, the department, as part of the broader South African government, we've been supporting and we continue to support the establishment and growth of key institutions such as Biovac. And we remain quite convinced about our support to Afrigen Biologics, the CSIR, and the South African Medical Research Council, all of which play critical roles in building a national vaccines manufacturing capability. Now, thirdly, again, it's been mentioned that our department has been contributing towards a platform technology development through initiatives such as the mRNA transfer, and of course, which involves a collaboration with a number of global players. So these are some of the initiatives at a much more broader strategic level that we have set in place. Of course, the next step for us is to finalize that draft vaccine innovation and manufacturing strategy with a contribution of various stakeholders and consolidate the investment plan tied to it, including the implementation plan. Thank you.
Hello. So if I may ask a follow-on question, if I may. So that's at the research level, but at the policy level and the interplay between the different government departments, the DSTI are playing quite a pivotal role interacting between DTIC, DSTI, Department of Health around this idea of procurement and getting the different departments together in a cohesive strategy. So So to shape the local landscape at a governmental level, what is the DSTI doing in that space? You alluded to a couple of the things, but is there anything else you can add at a governmental level?
Of course, the three departments that you have mentioned, they remain critical in establishing a coherent and effective ecosystem within which to then advance vaccine manufacturing development. So coordination is critical, and it remains work in progress. And we all acknowledge, as the three departments, that we need to improve how we coordinate and collaborate. But also National Treasury is quite critical in enhancing that collaboration. So we do have the Interministerial Committee on Local Vaccine Manufacturing, which brings together these four departments: our department, Health, Trade and Industry and Competition, and National Treasury. But also the department participates in other joint initiatives. mRNA is one such example. And particularly our contribution is through an R&D consortium. So that's what we do. But we also provide support to MRC because we are also quite committed to make sure, as the Minister emphasized, that we need to set a very clear African research agenda. Research and development capability is quite critical for us to attain health sovereignty. So those are some of the things that we work with. And then, of course, SAPRA is quite an important role player as a regulator. It has a critical role to play, and we work with them. And we believe, as the CEO was saying here, that going forward, SAPRA will play a critical role in enabling success of the various institutions that we're working with, Biovac, CSIR, and so forth. Thank you very much.
So now we're going to pivot to the Department of Health. Arian, this microphone. Okay. So we're looking more at the I suppose, the procurement side, I would say. So what policy and frameworks or regulations have been developed to support local vaccine manufacturing and procurement at the DOH?
Here we go. Okay, sure. So thanks and welcome and hi everybody. So obviously the National Department of Health with our sister departments, the Department of Trade and Industry and the Department of Science and Innovation, supports local manufacturing through what we do, what we call preference for local manufacturing procurement. So in our contracting process, through our special requirements and conditions of contract, we specify the requirements for a company or for a manufacturer to be considered a locally producer of vaccines. And during our procurement process, we provide preference to enable us to procure from them during this process. But obviously all of our decisions are based within the procurement framework that exists within our country and also with the frameworks that are provided by our sister departments.
And are there sort of targets and milestones that you've got in place for that? Do you have a percentage you want to kind of get to over time?
We don't have a specific target or milestone that we're working towards because really the procurement is informed by the available capacity. We can't procure more than can be locally produced. So definitely we would like to increase our procurement from local vaccine manufacturers as we see that they have the ability to provide safe, effective and affordable vaccines that would meet the needs of the South African public in line with our standard treatment guidelines and essential medicines list. So obviously we would like to prioritize that through the government's broader localization agenda, and that would be by firstly providing preference for locally produced products, provided that these products are affordable and that the supply is sustainable and secure. Because what we want to ensure is that we would have access to these vaccines as they are required in line with our guidelines, that the quality and the regulatory standards are not compromised, and that we can ensure access of these vaccines to all of the people in South Africa that need them. So I would rather say that it's definitely not a target-driven approach, but more a capacity-driven approach. And as we see that the capacity increases, the Department of Health is committed to procure more vaccines locally that would meet the needs that we have for our population within a country. Thanks.
Thank you. And then we go to the third government department, Dr. Makube, and looking at what the DTIC is currently doing. And maybe you can talk a bit about, to build on the theme of the discussions, so what sort of specific policy instruments are being used to stimulate investment in vaccine manufacturing through the DTIC?
Good afternoon, and let me respect the protocol that has been established there. Well, the DTIC is the department that is involved in various sectors of the economy, mainly to support local production in the country, including the health sector. So we have been doing it through various policy instruments for a number of years. So we drive the localization agenda through the local content policy. We have been doing it since 2012. We also have our development finance institutions, the IDC, which is playing a role in the space by funding local manufacturers. We drive policy with regards to the intellectual property right. So our interest basically is to resolve the economic problem associated with the procurement of health products, mainly because we have a trade deficit in the area, which is creating a number of economic problems in the country, from equity in pricing, from displacement of the manufacturing capacity in the country. So in order to resolve some of the challenges, public interest challenges that we have, it is in our interest that we come up with policies, instruments to increase the capacity to manufacture health products in the country. And that is having many positive multiplier effects associated with the capacity to manufacture. And colleagues have indicated that skills development, tech transfer, research and development. So those are the variables that we look at when we develop policies in this area. Thanks.
And that includes incentives and the trade tax benefits, and all within that suite?
Definitely. Look, both financial and non-financial incentives are critical, right? Including the role of fiscal policy in this area, which is huge, but that's the role of the National Treasury, so it's not in my space, but we are responsible for other policy instruments. Incentives, yeah, we would expect to see our development finance institutions playing a role in this area, given that the responsibility is also expanded to include other countries. So the issue of regional value chains, it becomes critical. So if it means that we have to share the responsibility, procure certain inputs from other countries, we'll do that, because we'll have to optimize supply chains as well. Yeah.
And maybe I see the mic has been turned down enough. Okay, so I'm on it now. So maybe related to, we had an excellent previous panel, and I'm going to just have one follow-up question, if I may, about the standardization and harmonization between regulatory agencies. Is it the same activity happening between countries around trade agreements to facilitate the free flow of product once the regulators are in place? Are the department's trade agreements keeping pace with that?
Definitely. So as you know, that there's work being undertaken in the AFCFTA regarding the harmonization of regulatory standards. That will be extended to this area. So if you look at the autos, for instance, if I can refer to that. So as a country, in order to support the auto industry, we have taken a decision that we will put a limit on the importation of second-hand cars in order to support local manufacturing. So in this space, again, as different countries, we must agree on the harmonization, because if other countries will then procure illicit products and they don't put measures, that will undermine the development of the vaccines in the country. So that will be taken at the regional level.
Thank you very much. So, Stavros, would you mind passing the mic across to Farah there? Thank you. So we're going to change tack now to go to AVMI. Farah, maybe you can tell us a little bit about, for those people in the room who don't know exactly what AVMI's actual role, your objectives in really promoting vaccine research and innovation and capacity development in Africa, and particularly in South Africa.
Thanks so much, Richard, and thank you very much for having me. So, agreed, let's talk a bit about AVMI. AVMI is the African Vaccine Manufacturers Initiative. We represent 20 manufacturers on the continent at various stages of readiness to produce. Our main objective is actually to be the voice of industry as we co-create levers towards sustainable vaccine manufacturing. In other words, African problems need African voices around the table. And that's really our key objective. So what kind of levers towards sustainable vaccine manufacturing? I think key is demand and volumes, and that's probably where we spent the most of the time. And you mentioned in framing the statement, Richard, in terms of what are we doing as AVMI to also expand production capacity. I think the reality is there is sufficient capacity on the continent, and specifically within South Africa. However, it's about how do we get demand to those facilities so that they are sustainable and that we don't deindustrialize with, if we don't get demand going. The second key objective would be accelerating or access to the market through regulatory reforms, and we've heard a lot from Tumi today around that. But again, to repeat, because it's so critical, if it takes a couple of years for technology transfer, 2 years to get an NRA or SAPRA approval, and another maybe 2 years for WHO PQ, will the manufacturer be able to be competitive and get volumes after 6+ years? So regulatory reforms is the second key lever. Third is partnerships for innovation, I think are critical, and then obviously innovative financing. So I just want to reflect a little bit without just listing the challenges, what has been achieved, and I think where AVMI has played a key role to push for some reform. We have to acknowledge the Gavi-AVMA, which has been talked about a lot today, a $1.2 billion mechanism which looks to help a manufacturer reduce their costs and give them an ability to compete in the medium term. And the Gavi-AVMA, supported to large part by Team Europe, is really a significant mechanism that changes the business case for funding purposes. So that's the first one that I think is a big achievement. Second, and we can't not mention the UNICEF procurement commitment, which was made earlier this year at the Gavi Replenishment Summit. This is a remarkable achievement, right? A commitment to procure 20% of vaccines from African manufacturers by 2035. Important to note that the 20% could be higher, 2035 could be sooner, depending on AU member states' support for African manufactured vaccines. So that's the second big achievement. We have to also mention the Human Development Accelerator and Innovative Funding Mechanism, which was referred to earlier. So those are some of the wins. And just to close, you've asked about South Africa specifically. It was mentioned earlier today that 6 of the 8 antigens vaccines that are expected to be WHO pre-qualified by 2030 are expected to come from 2 manufacturers in South Africa, Aspen and Biovac. We've heard also that South Africa has the research, we have the scientists. So if indeed we have research and scientists where we have the disease burden, shouldn't we have end-to-end projects in South Africa? And so that's AVMI's priority that we're also busy with right now. How do we get additional resources for R&D? How do we get to support partnerships for innovation and de-risk for innovators so that African manufacturers can be the technology transferors of the future?
You touched on a couple of them beforehand, but so I mean, just maybe give a couple more about the big challenges facing the vaccine manufacturing, the industry in South Africa, and what do you suggest we can do to overcome them?
Okay, this is a good
2 minutes.
This is a good question. So I think South Africa is an interesting one. It was our president who called for vaccine sovereignty post-pandemic, right? It was President Ramaphosa who made the call for global procurers to buy from African manufacturers. However, from a procurement policy perspective, it prioritizes lowest cost still, and there aren't contractual protections for domestic manufacturers. So I think there are two clear areas here. 1 minute, two clear areas. The one is absolutely what incentives and packages can be put together and back-end tax breaks, and we can leverage pockets of excellence. For example, in Uganda, there's a company that has had a 10-year offtake for ARV manufacturer. It gives that manufacturer certainty. So there's been advancements in terms of the procurement bill that has set-asides for designated or protected health products, the SAPRA localization policy, etc. But I think if I could call out two key areas where we could take leaps and bounds forward, it was mentioned earlier, if we could have structured collaboration across departments, and acknowledging that localization is not a health agenda, it's not a trade agenda, it's a South African agenda, and we need to protect our existing industrialization. And secondly, if we could accelerate SAPRA to WLA, I think that would cut Tumi's laughing, that would cut the timeline significantly. So I think those are the key areas, and I just want to close by saying, from a manufacturer's perspective, I could talk all day, so I will stop. But from a manufacturer's perspective, I think it's important for, as Marina mentioned earlier, this is the ecosystem represented in this room. It's important to realize that manufacturers can no longer do technology transfers for the domestic market only. So all the levers that I've spoken about earlier need to be supported so that manufacturers can export, and by exporting, get volumes through their facilities, reduce their costs, and even then supply the domestic market at a better cost.
Thank you.
That's a very nice segue into Stavros, wearing very much the private sector representative hat here. So, building on that, what do you see are the key drivers in building sustainable local manufacturing vaccines industry?
Thanks very much, firstly, to the organizers for the invitation. I think these are very necessary conversations. I'm here wearing two caps or two hats. The first is chairman of Pharmisa, which is the local pharmaceutical manufacturers association. And then I'm also a board member of Business Unity South Africa, BUSA, which is the apex business organization, and is very much seized. So BUSA represents around 80% of the economy, the private sector economy. And industrialization is front and center of our economic policy, and it's something that BUSA is very supportive of. The conversations here are important because it gives us all a reality check. So business sits on the opposite end of the scale. So you've got the regulators, the multilateral organizations on the one hand, and then business sits on the other hand. They are the investors, they are the entities that invest capital, that create the jobs, that generate the taxes, and the taxes eventually are what will satisfy public health budgets and other socio-economic priorities in our country. So I'm going to talk a bit about the domestic picture and then also the international picture. So the first thing I do want to state, let me start off domestically. It's known to everyone that South Africa and Africa has one of the most disproportionate disease burdens of any continent. The statistics are something along the lines of we consume 25% of the required global resource for health, but we harbor less than that population-wise. So there's already an immediate problem there if you look at it on that basis. But then, to make the problem even worse, Africa continues to be a serial importer of pharmaceutical products. So as much as, and I'm not going to be as positive perhaps as some of the other, I'll end off on a positive note, but I'm not going to be as positive because I think we've got to call out the reality here, guys. I mean, let's confront the realities and let's do a proper analysis of how we have progressed. And that's why I'm very pleased Professor Barroso walked in, and boa tarde, and good to see you again. So let's look at the reality check. We can say we are making incremental progress as Africa, but the pharmaceutical trade imbalance grows every year. And even in my own country, which is the most industrialized of any country on the continent. South Africa is the most industrialized. Even in my own country, with all the interventions you've heard here from the officials, the trade deficit grows every year. So I'm saying the numbers never lie. That's what we've got to focus on. So when we say how well are we actually doing, there's only one indicator for me, and that is the numbers. Because at the end of the day, investors are going to look and say, where am I investing my capital? Capital is agnostic. Capital follows where there's the most predictable and certain environment, where there's policy implementation, and where they're going to get the best returns. That's unfortunately, whether we like it or not, that's the harsh reality. So we're not doing very well. I mean, here's the picture here. I can also cite, and last night I was at a working dinner with President Ramaphosa, and he recalled this. He was the champion and continues to be the champion on the continent for pandemic preparedness, and he was the one that picked up the cudgels for and on behalf of Africa. And we said in 2020-21, never again shall Africa be at the back end of the queue. And now, if I have a look at 4 years on, have we made progress? Did we produce an Mpox vaccine? No. Did we produce an Ebola vaccine? No. So the answer is we are not doing very well, colleagues. Let's face that reality. Now, what needs to be done, and I'm still looking at this multilaterally, I'm going to focus on the domestic picture, Dr. Makube, in a minute. There are 3 simple things we need to do multilaterally if we are to succeed in this African vaccine manufacturing project. Number 1 is we need, as Tumi has said, we need priority review and parallel submission between WHO and SAHPRA to happen with speed. And I say with speed because we're competing against the rest of the world. And now, Faraz mapped out the timelines. If a company starts today and wants to produce vaccines, and they set up, as my company, Aspen, he said, we've been waiting for 4 years, we are set up. We can move tomorrow morning. The timeline is 6 years. 2 years for technology transfer, maybe 2 years for SAHPRA, and then maybe 2 years for WHO PQ. So that's 6 years. Guess what happens in those 6 years? All your competitors from around the world are in the market, they close you out. So how are we going to get sustainability? You're not going to get it unless you significantly cut the timelines. So priority review, parallel submission, first thing we need to do with absolute speed. The second thing is we are highly appreciative of AVMA. However, AVMA is not fully fit for purpose for African manufacturers. There are 2 tweaks we require. The first is that in order to align the regulatory cycle with the procurement cycle, because you can also take 6 years, but then the next UNICEF procurement cycle starts in 3 years. Then you're 9 years down the track. AVMA is a 10-year project, and then maybe you start paying out some of the AVMA contributions in year 9 or 10. By that time, the industry will be dead and buried long ago. So the tweaks are, number 1, we need the cap on AVMA for fill and finish to be raised, because that's where you're going to invest most initially. And the second thing is there's a 200 million in addition to the $1 billion that should be used to help bolster Africa for its own procurement. Now, let me move on to the third and final point there, and that is Africa charity starts at home. We need to set up our own pool procurement. The Africa First Initiative, Yavi is in the room somewhere. You can put your hand up, Yavi, wherever you are. That is an initiative that is being pushed by the Africa Prosperity Fund. It's a $100 million facility. It will be announced shortly, I believe. And that will also help galvanize pool procurement in the continent. If we do those 3 things, we can sit here next year with a completely different picture. Okay, now let me end off with the domestic picture. It's true that South Africa has industrialization as front and center of its economic growth policy. Pharmaceuticals are the second priority in the industrialization plan. Dr. Makube will tell you that, right? And the most important lever that we have to industrialize pharmaceuticals and narrow that trade deficit I spoke about is the preferential procurement system we have. And there are two laws, the Preferential Procurement Framework Act and the Public Procurement Act. So this is legislated. So it's not something that's aspirational, it's actually legislated and specifically for that purpose. Why has it not worked? It hasn't worked because we don't have coordination amongst the 4 departments that need to execute on this. The 4 departments in no particular order of preference: National Health Department, Treasury, Department of Trade, Industry and Competition, Department of Science, Technology and Innovation, here on my left. Okay. So those are the 4 departments, and I'm afraid to say they haven't aligned yet, okay, because of 2 things. Number one, health do the procurement, and health is saying, but our mandate is to stretch that health rand as far as possible. It's not to support industrialization efforts, okay? And then you've got science and technology and DTI and saying, but this is the most important lever to industrialize. Okay, so you've got this going on. And then we have a debate on we should be procuring on what is the lowest price. Okay. Now, let me make it clear from the private sector. The most effective procurement decision is what constitutes best value for money, not what is the lowest price. So let me give you an example. You can save R1 per unit on a vaccine, and you buy 1 million vaccines. So I've done a great job because I saved R1 million. Okay. But if you lost R3 per vaccine, to multiply economic impact back into the economy, you've made a very poor decision as a country because you've actually lost out R2 million in that instance, and you've probably chased away the investor. Okay. I've spoken for a long time because we don't get this opportunity every day to speak, and I'm so pleased Professor Barroso, he's a great friend of South Africa for many years, and I'm pleased the embassy is here as well. It's important that we converse these messages, and important that we heard, but most important is that we give the regulators, the multilateral organizations in the room, the reality on the ground. And we need to narrow and converge the distance between what is policy up here and what is actually being implemented on the ground. We need to narrow that gap quickly, otherwise we're going to lose traction on this Africa vaccine manufacturing initiative. Thanks very much for listening to me.
Thank you, Stavros. Okay, so I did have a series of questions for you, Stavros, but you went through all of them before. So we have 5 minutes for questions, and then I'm going to come back to maybe 1 or 2 closing comments with some of the panelists. So who's going to open the floor? If anyone's going to open the floor, is everyone hungry? Let's do both questions. So Tumi, you start and then pass back.
Thank you. And I'm going to ask my parent institution department this question. But this point that's been made around procuring based on the lowest cost, I think it will be important for the department to share more around why are we not seeing reforms in that area? Because it's been a conversation that's been happening for many, many years. Sorry, Mary.
Let's do the next question.
Good day, my name is Masha Mayana, freelance journalist for Newsday Lesotho. My question is around access. I mean, this is a high-level conversation, but we know that at the end of the day, it's people who are going to be using like the vaccines and some of the pharmaceutical products that are being developed. So from a communications perspective, especially considering the disinformation around pharmaceutical products, what are some of the strategies that are currently being put in place to preempt? Because we know that whenever a new product is released, there's going to be people who are opposing it and coming up with their own facts around it. So what is being done to ensure that by the time these vaccines are ready to be distributed to communities, people are aware why they had to be manufactured, who's the manufacturer, and how they are going to benefit them. Thank you.
So we got a very similar question from the case in the previous session, so maybe we can be very brief on how we address that one, because we did address it a little bit in the previous session, but we get the panelists to have a go. Let's do another third question, and then I see Ken's also. Why don't you go first, Ken? Because I was actually pointing behind you, but you just go for it.
Thanks. Ken Osei from the IFC, International Finance Corporations. Question to the Ministry of Health, SAPRA, and WHO. What is the technical reason why parallel approvals cannot be done, WHO and SAPRA?
Okay, and then we have our very last question, because that's going to use up all the time.
Working now?
Yes.
Lawrence Klitter from Rebel Group. We recently completed a study, GIZ-funded study on the biopharmaceutical landscape, and many of the things that have been said today about vaccines apply to other pharmaceuticals as well. My initial question was going to be in the previous panel, but then I think Stravos answered most of those questions, and I remember him saying similar things when we interviewed him for a SADC study on local manufacture of ARVs and antimalarials. I don't know if you can remember, Stravos. But I agree with what you said about the need for coordination between these 4 departments. And I'm just wondering, in the panel, are there some thoughts of how this could happen in practice and how we can leverage the domestic market to stimulate industrial development?
Okay, who wants to have a stab at any of those questions? You want to take the last one? Why don't you go first for the last one, just so we...
I just want to address that because I thought I should have mentioned it earlier. When I think myself and Stavros spoke about this structured collaboration between the departments, a good example, and it's working so well, is PVAC in Nigeria, where they have presidency and health and all the cabinet supporting localization. And so it accelerates the presidential agenda to a country agenda and not a health one. And so I think that is a practical example.
So maybe for...
Can I add to that?
Go for it.
Okay, so I'm going to cite Egypt as an example, right? Because we're talking about Africa here, right? So Egypt, this became a presidential decree because they had exactly the same issue. Multiple ministries couldn't get on the same page. So there's this presidential decree. They set up something called the UPA, which is the United Procurement Authority. It's a kind of a super ministry almost. And they set themselves a target. In 4 years, they were able to, everything that they could produce locally, they produced 92% of it locally. Okay, so the UPA guy was out here recently, he's a general, and he reconfirmed this to me. So I think what's encouraging in our country, and I don't want to say too much on this because it's something that's a work in progress. Our president has convened the ministries. I think it's well known. We wait with great anticipation to this coordinated effort. But I think with any of these discussions, you have to take what is the best procurement decision for the country. And that means the best fiscal and the best industrial decision for the country. And if it means, and Dr. Makube will know, there was a study that the IDC research unit did. It was a long time ago. It was on antiretrovirals, and that study demonstrated that for every 1 rand of antiretrovirals we procured in the public sector, if we were importing those products, we lost 32 cents of every rand. That could have gone back into our economy. So in a case like that, it actually demonstrates that you could entertain a 30% premium. So we've got to look at it on that way. The only way to solve this problem is 2 things. Number 1, you've got to define which department is going to pick up a premium, if any. And the second thing is you've got to work out what is a fiscally neutral premium. If you work that out, then the departments will all align. But we've got to get there because, as Tumi said, we've been discussing this, Tumi, actually for 25 years. Okay, and we cannot shouldn't be hanging out all the dirty linen here. But we cannot just keep discussing this when we are deindustrializing and our economy is in trouble. Thanks.
Okay. So maybe I think you kind of touched on, did that touch on some of your questions to me? Does DOH want to have a go at that? And Ken, did it address anything that you wanted? Maybe you catch them afterwards, because I'm going to use my executive power to close this on time.
Okay. I'm going to be as brief as possible, but I think that we need to remember that the core responsibility or mandate for the National Department of Health is to provide access to sustainable health services that is affordable and that uses our physical available resources to the best of our ability. That being said, we do procurement within the current Procurement Act or within the Public Finance Management Act that requires procurement to be fair, equitable, transparent, competitive, and the last one, cost-effective. So it's not about selecting the cheapest product. Obviously, through our procurement process, we do give preference as guided by the preferential procurement processes. And there is a new procurement bill which we're very excited for. And once the designation regulations related to that comes out, we hope that that would facilitate us to procure more locally after all of these discussions between the departments has taken place as to exactly where the premium, the levy for local procurement will have to sit, and whether that would be a shared responsibility between the different departments, whether that is rebates from the one department or support for, from science and innovation, it might be support for development, whatever would make vaccine production more affordable within the South African context. But what we should remember is that you can't only develop any product or produce it locally if your only market is going to be the South African market. It will not be sustainable because the South African economy and the population is not sufficient to get the economies of scale that you need to get to ensure that these products are affordable. So it's really not about procuring the cheapest product. That's not what we are in the business of. We rely on quality products that are approved by SAPRA, so we know that we are buying quality and safe products for our patients. But we are acting or managing the procurement process within the existing and available regulations that says that our procurement process must be cost effective in the best interest and value for money for the citizens of our country, which is what we're doing at the moment. Thanks.
Okay, final word to our government officials. What would you like to finish on?
Well, the president is coordinating us, the presidency. So there's a meeting scheduled the next 2 weeks to discuss the very same matter. But the issue here is that there must be ideological convergence on the economic principles, right? Price is a function of many things, direct and indirect subsidies. So if you are going to compare a price from foreign countries on the basis of how much it costs in South Africa and discount subsidies, right, and the cost of production, then we'll remain where we are. So we need to balance trade-offs between security of supply, pricing, and the support for local manufacturing, all right? And then have a roadmap on how we are going to achieve that. Because there is no point to use public finance to support jobs outside South Africa, because then we are creating other problems, like the government then must come in through the social wages, free housing, free education, and so forth. Whereas we can develop jobs, pay the price. There's a price to development, right? It's not free. But if you can model it so that there are multiplier effects in the economy, I think we'll go somewhere. So all of us, Department of Health, Science and Technology, Treasury, and the DTIC, we must agree that there is a cost. The issue is the premium to support industrialization. Thanks.
DG, would you like to have the last word? Sorry, we're hogging the mics.
No, thank you. This conversation is quite helpful. But it also says to me that maybe that's a challenge when you're having a conversation of this nature in Africa. Because we tend to be focusing more on the negatives, which is important to raise. But we spend more time and get stuck there and struggle to transition to a much more positive side where we explore solutions. And if you're having partners here, they may walk out of this conversation maybe becoming a little bit pessimistic about us. I want to start by saying, of course, let's acknowledge our international partners who are here and ask them to continue to provide support to us as Africans and to our institutions, particularly in terms of technology transfer, capacity building, skills development, and access to global markets. Because the institutions that we are developing, which we hope will help us realize this local manufacturing capability, will require such access. So we need our international partners. But two, let's also recognize here that we've got capacity that is globally recognized in terms of research and skills capacity. Colleagues have indicated that if we continue to delay making certain crucial decisions, we stand to lose such capability because people would leave this continent and grow and go elsewhere. So we need to protect that. So for us, it's important to continue investing in research and innovation, in skills development, in technology. But finally, I'm not going to touch on government coordination. I think this issue has been broadly covered. Yes, it's true. There's probably an engagement at 3 levels. At a DG's level, we are having a discussion. Ministers at a ministerial level, there's a discussion. The president, as Astrov has indicated, is also engaging. So hopefully we should find a solution. But I want to emphasize that the private sector is not a bystander and shouldn't be a bystander. Because this question we're dealing with here cannot be resolved in isolation of a much more productive engagement with the private sector. Because whatever decision we take, it depends or it gets determined and conditioned by not only the attitude of the private sector, as they correctly said, the private sector invests. So government needs to, once we have, but they don't need, that engagement doesn't need us to get our house in order as government. It's important to have a proper engagement with the private sector about the direction that we need to face. But we need as government to be clear about the role of the state in this particular debate. So the final point for us is that, of course, Biovac is critical to us and would like to continue to support it and promote its access to global markets because it will help us to achieve some of our strategic objectives. But thank you very much, I think, for this conversation.
Is it a very fast up?
It's a very quick one, because I do want to end off on a positive note. I said I would, okay. Because we're here with our European partners. So the Aspen, the company I represent, is one of the biggest taxpayers in Europe. So we've got some of the biggest plants, pharmaceutical plants. France's biggest taxpayer. We've got plants in the Netherlands, 3 plants. We've got plants in Germany, etc. So I think we're not an active bystander. We're an active investor in this. So some of the taxes that get created through Aspen activities in Europe are flowing back into this initiative. And then the second thing is that we have proven that we can manufacture cost competitively in South Africa. So Aspen is the largest supplier of general anesthetics and muscle blockers outside of the United States. Many of our products produced here in the Eastern Cape are exported to Europe. During COVID, we had President Macron phoning, we had the PM of Italy phoning and saying, please, Aspen, can you help Europe? Usually it's the other way around. It's Africa phoning and saying, to a European head of state, please help us. So all I'm trying to say is partnerships can work. We value the EU partnership, and we are pessimistic only if it relates to Afro-pessimism. But otherwise, we are optimistic, and we've proven that we can manufacture products competitively. Thanks very much.
So I'm going to call that a wrap, and I want to thank the panelists for giving a very detailed insight. I think this debate and discussion about interdepartmental jockeying, coming out with a solution at the other end, is going to be critical to not only the vaccine but the drugs and many of the medical services industries in South Africa and Africa and beyond. So I want to thank the panelists, and I'd like to thank the audience, and we will call this session a wrap.